All right, thanks for joining us on Bloomberg Quint. Joining me is Chetan Maini. He's also known as the pioneer for electric vehicle. His Reva was the first electric vehicle in India. Now, Chetan, thank you so much for your time speaking to Bloomberg Quint. I'll start with the macro picture here.
Yes.
We have seen a lot of incentives announced by government, policy as well, FAME 1, FAME 2. Where are we heading as far as the electric vehicle adoption in the country is concerned?
Well, I think in the last 90 days, there's been a lot of positive movement in this area. The FAME 2 policy has been out. Following that, there's been a reduction also on the GST from 12% to 5%. Several cities have looked at lower tariffs for electricity. And the government also announced buses of 5,000 buses approximately across a host of cities in the country on this area. All of this in the last 90 days, right? You've also seen, so I think it's setting the right tone for the industry. And you've also seen in the last few months several new players officially announcing that they're coming in. So I think it's the beginning of an area which is really transforming and happening globally. And I think that is now slowly starting in India.
But what more needs to be done from here in terms of, we have certain policies, we have incentives, GST has been brought down.
Yes.
Well, how do we cater the problem of building infrastructure? How do we cater the problem of mass adoption of EVs in the country?
So I think that infrastructure is going to be one important thing. There is some amounts of funds indicated towards that. So I think that's going to need a big focus for the industry to come in. There's an area that I think that the government needs to do more, especially on the policy front. For example, while they've reduced the GST for electric vehicles, if you were to put a charging station up or a swapping station up, you would have a GST on 18%, whereas public transportation is at 5%, or even vehicles are at 5%. So for a taxi driver to be paying 18% on fuel, which is green, doesn't make sense. So I think that policy needs to be fixed. And I'm hoping that with all the other changes happening, this comes through on this area. Also, probably you'll have new business models coming out. Fast charging, regular charging, ultra-fast charging, swapping. So there'll be different infrastructure models. The government's policy needs to be highly technology agnostic to support all of them in the early stages, and whatever works moves forward. Today, that is, while the policies talked about being open, the clarity is not there from FAME 2 on these areas. So these two would help bring more clarity in some of the industry, which I think would bring in a lot more investments, which are critical. On the other side, I think it's important that we have ecosystem players come together. So we're also going to need tier one suppliers who can supply into OEMs on this area. We're going to need more battery manufacturing. 50% of the bill of material in electric cars are different. So that whole infrastructure has to start to, from a tier one, has to be built up. And that, I think, will take the next 24 to 36 months. While some companies have started, that's going to need another big push in the country.
And battery is crucial for EV adoption. 40% of at least cost comes from the battery. We have, there's a fear in the market of the Chinese battery coming into the quality of the battery, the pricing of it. Can that slow down sort of the adoption and also,
I think at any instant of technology shift, we as a country should be very careful. Should be no compromise on safety. There should be no compromise on quality. The government has put together a set of good standards at ARI that all the batteries have to be certified from that area with the vehicles. So I think there's a good framework. I'm sure things can be done over time to further strengthen it. And that does give, unlike a consumer electronic business, at least the automotive goes through a more regulated way. So there's less chance of those things coming through in the regulated market. Now, there are e-rickshaws and other stuff that are slightly unregulated, and there will be some of that on this front. But I think over time, India has serious OEMs, and I think this is going to be less of a concern.
But how do we promote battery manufacturing, setting up in the country?
That's I think, very critical. Now, it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing, right? The battery manufacturers saying where are the cars, and the other vice versa. So I think there's been talks from the government to put up several gigawatts of support on this area. I think once that policy is clear and comes out, that could probably bring several players. It's also, however, important in that area that there is a lot of Indian companies that participate and build the ecosystem in the country.
So there should be a need of incentives for domestic players to come up and set up, because we're seeing, several news reports say that Tesla has shown interest, Cattle has shown interest in part of the battery manufacturing base setting up. But how do we ensure that domestic players also
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, if I look at any industry globally, be it in the US or in China, right, domestic players have been given support. It's a nascent industry. We have to catch up on this area. So I think there should be, additional support given for companies in India who are going to put this money forward, put the capability in the space. It's going to also need support from global. So we have to have both come together. But I think it's a great opportunity if the right incentive structures put in for a lot of Indian companies to probably get into the space.
But there's no fear at this point in time in the market where the Chinese are taking over the battery space, at least to begin with?
Well, today they are the largest in the world. So therefore, and of course, Japan and Korea are very large markets. So in Asia in general would be large market entry into India. In some of the simpler areas like 2 and 3 wheelers, you're probably right that would happen. In more mature products like cars and buses, which needs a high level of sophistication, that's going to need more mature players to come.
Right, and coming to Sun Mobility, you recently did interesting partnership with Uber for setting up batteries for 3 wheelers in the country. Talk to me about that and what more is there.
So, if you look at fundamentally, and you came to battery prices, why electric vehicles aren't taking off, it's because the cost of electric vehicles are very high, driven by the cost of batteries, right? The second reason people are really concerned about is range anxiety. What if I run out of charge? And the third part is, is long refueling time. It takes, 3 to 5 hours to charge, or even 1 hour to fast charge. Consumers are used to 5 minutes. By separating the batteries out of the vehicles, you can get form factors of 3 wheelers, for example, or 2 wheelers or buses to be cost neutral. With the cost of energy today and battery amortization, you can get the cost of per kilometer to be cheaper, and with lower maintenance also. And if you can swap them in a minute, you address both range anxiety and long refueling time. So when we think of the shared mobility market like Uber, for them it is very important, one, could products be similar price for consumers? Two, could the actual driver make a little bit more on this area? And three, is there any concern if you were to scale a business up, right? Because the drivers may one day want to drive 150 kilometers, one day 100. And so these are very important criteria. And we've put this in place. We have OEMs on the platform already. And in a couple of months, we'll be launching. We announced it, of course. In a couple of months, we'll actually be launching in India.
And how many in the first batch, how many electric 3 wheelers are we looking at? And is this partnership just restricted towards 3 wheelers, or we can soon expect cars as well?
Well, I think the partnership today is focusing on 3 wheelers. Uber, of course, has other vehicles on its platform, and it's something that over time we will work towards. But I think the large market in India for areas, especially around battery swapping, is 2 wheelers and 3 wheelers, and that's where our focus is going to be initially.
And as far as Sun Mobility, what kind of opportunities are you looking at as far as the electric vehicle ecosystem is concerned?
So we've already teamed up with around 10 OEMs across different platforms. We've teamed up with 10 mobility solution providers, and our idea is to help create an open architecture infrastructure. The battery we do, you can go in any 2-wheeler or 3-wheeler, over 20 million vehicles produced a year. We're trying to be an Android there and help, on one side, consumers to get products that could be cost effective and adopt green products, and OEMs to allow them to get quick to market and sell more product. So we're an enabler, and this business is going to be large. I think that electrification, especially in 2 and 3 wheelers, in the next 5-7 years could be very high, up to 50%, if not more. And so we see ourselves being a dominant player in this field and supporting the industry.
And as far as just last 2 quick questions, as far as the setting up the battery infrastructure is concerned, what strategy should we go? Because there's a sort of hesitant in the market, should we go for the battery swapping way as well? Because where you can't really maintain the quality of the battery as well. There's whole sort of fears around battery swapping infrastructure as well. Are those fears warranted? And should we be more agnostic in terms of how we go?
Yeah, very good, both very good points. I think from a battery swapping point of view, actually the safety is significantly higher. In India, especially in 2 and 3 wheelers, the ambient temperatures go up to 45 degrees, and that heat causes a lot of battery degradation. Imagine if your scooter was lying outside in this area. Our stations are air conditioned, so they cool the batteries down, and they're connected always online on the internet, so you can actually monitor the batteries in real time. This is very essential in shared markets, where so you're preventing abuse, which could be very high, and ensuring that the battery is always in its perfect condition to be used on this front. Your point on I think there's going to be all these technologies coexisting. If I was a scooter, personal mobility doing 40 kilometers a day, had a plug point in my home or my apartment, it would make logical sense for me to have a small fixed battery and do it. If I was a school bus going to school, which did 40 kilometers up, had 7 hours to charge and 40 kilometers back, I would use a small battery pack and do regular charging. If I started to go shared mobility, I would do swapping. Because you have, one day you may do 100, next day you may do 150, you want flexibility, you want refueling in less than a couple of minutes. You are anyway in the shared market, the shared battery is in a way allowing you to reduce cost. So there are going to be solutions that coexist on this area. It's not one thing that's going to solve all industry issues on this.
All right, and lastly on the policy that the government is working on setting up battery infrastructure, manufacturing base in the country, what does the industry want at this point of time? What should be the part of that policy?
I think the policy right now, from the little bit I've seen in the newspapers and read about it, is a lot towards very large gigawatt level plants. And I think that's very essential. But I also think here's an area where not just the largest companies in the country, but the medium-scale industries and the small industry could also get into pieces of the battery. There could be component manufacturing for battery, there could be battery cell manufacturing, there could be pack manufacturing, and some need higher investments, some need lower. So I think the government should not just think of the larger picture to say, let's get the first 10 gigawatt hour factories out there, but what do we do with the other part of the industry? How do we create them, also incentivize them to get it? EV and battery technology also is in a high level of innovation. You're going to have new tech coming in every year. So if some of them may come from startups and smaller companies. So we should have an open view of how we think of battery technology and ensure the policies cater to both the research and development, the entire ecosystem of the batteries, and smaller companies and larger companies.
And just to add to that, when do you see, pricing has been key for EVs in the country.
Yeah.
When do you see the pricing of electric vehicles coming down?
Well, battery prices have been going down 8% year on year. But batteries still constitute in small form factors almost 50% of the cost of the vehicle. So even if you look at it, it's going to take a very long time on this area. And that's why I think innovative models around battery swapping and leasing are going to be very critical. That'll allow us to get cost parity today. In larger form factors, cost parity could come in the next 4 or 5 years. Because at that point, the percentage of the battery may be 25, 30% of the cost of the vehicle. But if you think of most of cars in India, which are under 5 lakhs or 6 lakhs, you think of all our scooters, which are under 80,000 rupees, and you think of our 3-wheelers, which are under 1.5 lakhs or 2 lakhs, very difficult in these form factors to get, or in buses too, because bus batteries could be 3 times the cost of a bus. And so swappable, again, makes a lot of sense.
All right, Chetan. Many thanks for your time and speaking to Bloomberg Quint.
Pleasure.